In this video, we are going to create our CRUD application that we started in the previous video. The first thing I will do is to go to the main layout and delete this server prompt component that we put on the main layout, and now let's build our CRUD application. We will start by installing Entity Framework Core on our server project. So for that, we are going to go to our server project, right click, we're going to click on Manage NuGet Packages, and I'm going to install Entity Framework Core. For that, we will say Microsoft. We will click on this, and I will not choose the pre-release version, so I will use the 2.2.6 version of Entity Framework. So I'll click on Install. Now we have to install this other package, Microsoft Entity Framework Core.design. I will install that. And with this, we have Entity Framework Core in our application. Now, we are going to create a model. That model will be created on the shared project. So I will come here, and I will create a new folder. I'll name it Models. And here, we will create our model. It will be a person model. It will be a really simple model, because the point of this video is to build a CRUD application using Blazor. So we will put an ID property and a name property. Now let's create our application DB context. Let's go to the server project and let's create a new class. Its name will be application DB context. It will inherit from DB context. Now let's make a constructor here. It will receive DB context option as a parameter of type application DB context options, and we will pass that to the base class. And let's put here a DB set of people, DB set of person, and the name of the table will be people. With this, we are configuring Entity Framework code first, so in our database we are going to have a table based on the person model. Let's bring this namespace. Now we need a connection string. For that, we can create a JSON file here. So I'll go to new item. I'll click here. I'll say JSON. I'll choose app settings. I'll click on add. And here we even have a default connection, which we can use. The name of the database is going to be Blazor CRUD app demo. And this all seems fine. Now we have our connection string. Now we need to be able to read it from our application. For that, we are going to go to the program class, and we will use the function add.json file so that we can have our app settings.json as a configuration provider. We will not make it optional, so it will be required. And we will say relaunch change true. Let's close parentheses. And with that, we will be able to read our app settings from our application. Let's go to the startup class, and here we will make a constructor, and we are going to inject a configuration. Let's create a field from it. And now let's go to the configure services method in order to configure our application DB context. We will say services at DB context, application DB context, options use SQL Server. Let's bring this namespace, and we will pass the connection string. For that, we will use the configuration parameter that we're receiving through the constructor of the class. We will say get connection string, and we will put here the name of the connection string, which is default connection. I will copy this and paste it here, and I'll put a semicolon here. And with that, we are configuring Entity Framework Core in our Blazor application. Now let's add a migration. For that, you can come here to the Package Manager console. If you don't have it here, you can go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager console, and we can use the following command: add migration, and we can say initial. Initial will be the name of the migration. We got an error because we forgot to add a package to our project. So let's go back to our NuGet Package Manager here, and we will say Microsoft.entityframeworkcore.tools. I'll click here, and I'll click on install. Now let's go back to the Package Manager console, and let's rerun the command. And now we're good to go. Now after that, I will run the command update database, which is the one that will actually create our database in our SQL Server instance. And it is done. So now what we need is to create a controller in which we will be able to talk to our database using Entity Framework Core. So let's go to the controllers folder, and let's add a new class. We'll call it people controller. This should inherit from controller base. We should bring this namespace. This will have the decorator API controller, and we will use the following route, API/controller, which means that this controller will live on API/people. Now let's use dependency injection to inject our application DB context in our people controller. We will name it context, and let's create our methods for getting a person from the database, creating a person, updating a person, and deleting a person. First, let's start with the get method. We will say HTTP get, so this method will be async because we will use asynchronous programming, and we will return a task of action result of list of person, and let's bring this namespace. The name of the method will be get, and we will just return await context.people to list async, and let's bring this namespace too. And this is it. Now let's create a method for retrieving a single person from the database. This route will be named, and we will name it getPerson. It will be clear why we're naming it in a minute. For that, let's just make this async method, which will return a task of action result of person, and it will be get int ID, because clients will be able to send us the ID of the person that they want to retrieve, and we will say return await context.people first or default async, and we will filter by the ID. Now we need to be able to create persons from this controller, so we're going to create now an HTTP post action, task action result, post person, and let's add it to the DB context. Await context save changes async, return new created at route result, and we will use this. Then new ID equal to person.id, and the third parameter is going to be the person itself. So what are we doing here? What we're doing here is that we are saying that we have successfully created a person in the database, and we are indicating that that person can be retrieved in the getPerson route, which is this one that we have here. That's why we have to give it a name, because we needed to reference it. After that, we're providing the route values that this method requires, which is the ID of the person. And finally, we're returning to the client the person that was created. Here we have to fix this, and this is done. Now, let's make a method for updating persons. Let's say HTTP pod public async task action result person. So let's say context entry person.state equal to entity state modified, and let's save changes context save changes async, and finally we can return a 204 or no content. Finally, let's make our action for HTTP delete, and for that we only need to receive the ID of the person that should be deleted, and let's say task action result delete int ID. We can build a person from this. We can say bar person equal to new person ID equal to ID context dot remove person and save changes, and we can return no content as well. With this, we have our controller ready. Now we must work on our front end. Let's return to our Blazor project, and here in pages we are going to create a new folder that will group every component that is related to our person model. We will call this folder people, and we can create a new component. For that we can say add new item razor component, and we can name this component something like people index or just index. In this case I will just choose index. Now let's put a page directive here that will be /people, and now let's go to our nav menu component, because we want to be able to access this new component from our menu. Let's copy and paste this, and let's change this so that it says people, and the href should also say people. Now let's press Ctrl F5 in order to run our application. And we have it here. And let's go to people. And we can see that we are in our new people component. So in this component, we want to place a list of people that are in our database. For that, we need to make an HTTP GET request to our controller. We do that using the HTTP client class. Let's go back to our index component here in Visual Studio. Let's go here. Let's close everything else. And let's use dependency injection so that we can use our HTTP client class from our component. So for using dependency injection in a Blazor component, we have to use the inject directive. And then after that, we indicate the service that we want to retrieve. And after that, we declare a variable with this name. So this is equivalent to using property injection in the following way. This is equivalent to say public HTTP client HTTP get and set, and we can use the inject attribute, and these two things are completely equivalent. Here we are using property injection, but I prefer this syntax because it is more succinct. So I will delete this, and now I will create a property here that is going to be an array of people. So we'll say person array people get and set. Now we don't have access from here to the namespace in which this class is in. In order to fix that, we can go back to the person class, we can copy this, and we have two options. We could use the using directive here by saying using and pasting here this namespace so that now we have access to the person class, or since we're going to be using this namespace from different components in our application, we can cut this and we can use the imports.razor file, which allows us to make imports that are applied to every component in our application. So now I can paste this, and if I go back to my component, we can see that again we have access to the person class. Now let's change this for people, and now we need a method that will make an HTTP request to our people controller. For that we can say async task load people, and we can say people equal await HTTP get JSON async person, and we're going to say here API / people, and with this we are making an HTTP GET request to our people controller, and we are deserializing the response to an array of persons. Now we need to run this method from a special method that runs when the component loads, which is called, this method is called onInitializeAsync. So let's say protected override async task onInitializeAsync, and from here we can just say, await load people. Now this array of persons, we want to display it on the UI. So we need to take care of three states of our people property. The first state is that this property is null, so we are going to say if people is equal to null, then we are just going to write the text loading. Then we must take into account the case when the array of people is empty, that is, that there are no records in the database. For this we can say else if people.length is equal to 0, then we can say something like this: there are no records in the database. Finally, we can say else, and this block of code is going to run if there are actually people in the database. For that we're going to make an HTML table. We will say class table, which comes from Bootstrap. We're going to say the head, and we will write this. We will have 3 columns, a column for buttons, a column for ID, and a column for the name of the person. And now we will say tBody, and here we will do a for each, because we will iterate every single person from our array, and we will say bar person in people, and we're going to create a line for each person. So let's say TD here, and we're going to make an anchor. We'll say button success, edit, and a button for deleting the person. We will say delete here, and then let's say the ID of the person ID, and finally person name. With this, the people we have in our database will be shown. However, we know that our database is empty for now, so to verify that this component works, we can hard code some people only for testing. We can do this on the client side, of course, because this is just C#, so I can just say here people equal to new person array, and we can initialize here 2 persons. We can put a semicolon here, and now we can compile our application, and we can go back to Google Chrome, and let's refresh the page. And as we can see, we had a loading message in the screen, and after a while, we got a response from the server, and these 2 people showed up in our HTML table. Now, we need to create a new component that will help us to create new people in the database. For that, we can go back to Visual Studio, and let's create a new component. Let's go here to the people folder, and let's create a new component. Let's go to new item, raise our component, and I will name it create. And of course, we have to use the page directive in order to indicate a route for this component. So we will say people/create, and now I will put a link here at the top of this component, and I will paste this code. This is just an anchor that points to people/create. We can compile our application to verify that this works. We can refresh the page, let's click on new person, and here we are in our people create component. Now let's go back to Visual Studio and actually work on this component. So now let's go to our create component, and the first thing that we will do is to work on the C# code of it. So let's inject an HTTP client, because we need to communicate with the backend in order to send the person that we want to create. So let's say async task create person, and let's say await HTTP post JSON async API/people, and we need to pass a person here. So let's create a person field here. Let's say person new person, and let's pass this person to our controller. Now here we can create a form in which the user is going to fill all the information for a person. For that, we can use a special component that makes it easy for us to do forms based on a model. For that, let's say edit form, and we will pass the model, and the model is going to be this person field that we have here, and we can use onValid submit, so that when the user submit the form and every validation rule passes, then this method is going to execute. So let's say create person, and now let's create our form. This will be a really simple form since it is going to have only one field. So let's paste this code, and as we can see, we will have the name of the person here, and we will use the input text component, which helps us to fill the value of the person name from the text of the text box, and it will also help us when installing the control when doing the model validation. And speaking about model validation, let's say that we want our name field to be required. So how can we do that? Well, there are several ways of doing this. One of the classical ways of doing this, it is using data validation attributes. So for that, we can go here to the person class, and we can say required here, and we will see that we have an issue here because we need to install a Nugget package on our shared components. So for that, we're going to come here, we will say manage Nugget packages, and we will install the system.componentModel.annotations package, and we will install it here, and we will press here. And now let's go back to our person class, let's click Ctrl dot, and let's bring this namespace here. So we are good on that. So now there is a validation rule on this model that says that the name property is required. And because we're using Blazor, this validation is not only going to be enforced on the back end, but it is actually going to be enforced on the front end. And there is actually not much we have to do in order to benefit from this on our create component. For that, we only need to use a single component here that is called data annotations validator, and that's actually it. With this, we're going to be able to leverage those data annotations attributes that we are using in the person class here on our front end. Something we have to do is to use the validation message component here so that we can write any validation error related to the name property. So for that, we're going to say person.name here, and we can close this. And let's close parentheses here. And this is it. We actually just built our form. Finally, we want to be able to redirect the user to the index component after they finish creating the person. For that, we need to use another service that it is called a URI helper, and we will store it in the URI helper variable. And with that, we can redirect the user to another URL. For that, we're going to say navigate to, and we will say people. And that's it. Now we can compile our application, and we can go back to Google Chrome. And before doing anything else, let's go back to Visual Studio because we forgot to remove the hard-coded persons that were here. Let's delete this. Besides that, we forgot to add a button here that will allow us to submit the form. So let's create a button here of type submit, create person, and now let's recompile the application. And let's go back to Google Chrome, let's refresh the page, and we can see that there are no records in the database. If I click on create person without filling this field, you can see that we have this validation error here. And this validation was actually enforced on the front end. We didn't actually go to the server in order to just receive this message. So this means that our application is being performant right now with respect to business validations. So now let's put Felipe here, and let's click on create person. And here we have Felipe, which comes from the database. We can do this again for Jessica. Let's click on create, and we have Jessica also. Now we need to be able to edit these people. So let's go back to Visual Studio and actually do this. Now let's think about what we are going to do. We are going to create a new component, which is going to be called edit. So let's create it. Let's say Blazor component, edit. So what are we going to do in this component? Well, we're going to be able to edit a person, which means that we need to have a form that is exactly like the one that we have in the create component. But it wouldn't be okay for me to just come here, copy this and paste it here. This is not good practice because it makes our application less maintainable because we are duplicating code. So what can we do? Well, we can actually encapsulate this form in a component. So let's just do that. Let's come here, let's create a new component, let's click on Blazor component, and we will call it person form, and I will come here and I will cut this and I will paste it here. I will remove this. And now what do we need? Well, we need a few parameters. For example, the person is going to be a parameter. The function that we're going to execute when the user submits successfully the form is going to be a parameter. And this text here is actually also going to be a parameter. So let's start with a person. Let's say parameter. It has to be public. It will be of type person. And its name will be person. And now let's copy this and paste it here and paste it here and here also. Now let's go with the text of the button and let's copy this and paste it here. Let's use an @ sign and place this here. Also, I want to give it a default value, which will be save person. And let's put a semicolon here. Finally, let's make the third parameter, which is going to be of type event callback, and I'll call it onValid submit. By using event callback, we're able to actually send a method to a component. So let's copy this and paste it here on valid submit. And with this we are finished. Now I can use this person form component from our create component. So let's come here and let's say person form. And we need to pass it 3 attributes, which are the button text, which is going to be create person, the person, which is going to be this person that we have here, and finally the onValid submit parameter, which is going to be this create person method that we have here. And now let's close this. And as you can see, our create component does not have to know the shape of the form of a person. the only thing that it needs to know, it is what to do when we want to create a person. Now let's do the same thing here on our edit component. Let's say person form component here, button text, edit person, the person, which we're going to create in a moment, and on valid submit, which is going to be a method here. Async task, edit person, and let me just paste this here, and let's close this. So now, what do we need? We need a person first. But what kind of person? Well, we need a person that we want to edit. For that, we need its ID at the very least. So from where should we receive that ID? We can receive the ID from a route value. So let's say page here, and let's say people/edit/person ID. And we can say that it will be of type integer. And we forgot to put a slash here. And with that, we can retrieve the person ID from the URL. Now we need a parameter in order to store that person ID. So let's say parameter public int person ID get and set. And now we need a special method that will be run after every parameter is set. That method name is onParameterSetAsync. So let's actually use it. Protected async override onParametersSetAsync. And now in this method, we are actually going to retrieve the person from the database. First, we need to be able to store this person as a field here. So let's say person equal new person. And let's say person equal to await. And we need to do an HTTP request. So let's inject our HTTP client here. Let's say HTTP here. So HTTP get async. And we will deserialize this into a person. And let's say API/people/person ID. And we need to say here get JSON async, and that will fix this issue. And this person, we have to paste it here. Finally, let's implement this edit person method. For that, we will say await http.putJSONAsync API people, and let's pass this person here. And again, we want to be able to redirect the user to the index component. So for that, we will inject our URI helper, and let's say here URI helper navigate to people, and that's pretty much it. So we are not only being able to create and edit people, but we are also reusing the form of a person. Finally, we need to go to the index component, and we need to go to the edit anchor. And let's say here href people/edit/, and we need to put here the ID of the person /person.id. And let's click on save, and let's rebuild the application. Now let's go back to Google Chrome. Let's refresh the page. And now let's click on new person. Let's see that this component still works. So let's create a Richard person. And we have Richard here. And now let's say we want to edit him. And let's put up to here, and let's click on edit. And as we can see, we have Richard 2 here. So as you can see, when we click on edit, we are redirected to people/edit/3, 3 being the ID of Richard, and this 3 is being retrieved by our person ID property, and with that we are sending an HTTP GET request to our controller in order to retrieve the person. So now let's click on edit again. And as we can see, the only thing that we're missing is to be able to delete a person. So let's actually do that. For that, let's go back to Visual Studio, and let's create a method that will handle that operation. So let's go here. Let's say async task delete person int person ID. And let's say await http delete async API/people/ the ID of the person. So let's use a string interpolation, and person ID here, semicolon, await, load people, and of course we need to copy this and wire it to our button. For that, let's say on click, and we actually need to use a lambda expression because we want to be able to pass the ID of the person. And then we say person.id. So as you can see, we use a lambda expression to pass a parameter to a method that we want to run and responds to a click event. Now let's save and recompile the application, and let's go back to Google Chrome, refresh, and let's click on delete. We are going to delete Richard, and as we can see, we deleted Richard. But this is bad user experience because we should at least ask the user to confirm the operation. For that, we can use the confirm from JavaScript. But how do we use JavaScript in a Blazor application? Since we are only using C# here, C# and HTML. For that, we have a service that is called IJS Runtime that allows us to run JavaScript functions. So we can say inject IJS Runtime JS, and I can come back here and I can wrap this method with if JS invoke async bool, because we are going to receive a bool from the confirm JavaScript function, and we can actually pass it a parameter. That parameter is going to be, do you want to delete this person? And now let's use this. We need to use await, and we can cut this and move it here. Now we need to be able to retrieve the name of the person that is going to be deleted. For that, we can use LINQ. Let's say person selected people. From people, we can use LINQ and say first x.id, person ID. And as you can see, we are using LINQ in Blazor, which is really nice. So we will use a string interpolation here, and we will put the name of the person. And that is actually it. Let's recompile our application, and let's go back to Google Chrome. Let's refresh the page. Let's click on delete for Jessica, and you can see that we have the message, do you want to delete Jessica? If I click on cancel, then nothing happens. But if I click on OK, then Jessica is deleted. As you can see, we can use Blazor in order to build a CRUD application that barely uses any JavaScript, and it is an interactive application in which we can do many things. And of course, if we need JavaScript, as in this case, you can see that we can use the IJS Runtime service to run arbitrary JavaScript code in our application. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe and let me know what you want me to cover next. Thanks!